Hello friends, in this video tutorial, we have started discussing how can we perform PHP CRUD operation with JSON file instead of MySQL database. Generally, CRUD operation in web application are mainly used for manage data dynamically. And mostly, we have store data and fetch data from database. But there are any situation where we cannot use database for manage data. Then JSON format is the best option for manage data by store data in JSON file instead of MySQL. So for under this tutorial, we have started discussing how can we perform PHP CRUD operation with JSON file data. So in this part, we will show you how to load JSON file data in jQuery DataTable plugin. So we can view JSON file data in jQuery DataTable in tabular format, and we can easily manage data. Now let's start discussing this topic. So this is our working folder. And here, we have three files like action.php, data.json and index.php file. First we have to open data.json file. So in this file, we will store data. Here we can see that some data already stored under this file, with key name like it, first name, last name, gender and age. So we will fetch data from this file and display under jQuery DataTable plugin. Now we have to open index.php file, and under this file, here we can see that we have already included Bootstrap 5 library, jQuery library and DataTable library link. Under this file, first we have to create one HTML table with class is equal to table, table striped and table bordered class. And here we have it attribute is equal to sample data. Under this table, we have to create one table head tag. And between this, we have to create one table row tag. And under table row tag, we have to create 5 table head tag with text like first name, last name, gender, age and action table column. Below table head tag, we have to create one table body tag. So here our HTML code is ready. Now we have go to JavaScript code part, and here we have to create one function with name like load data. Under this function, we have to write seconds variable is equal to new date function divided by 1000, so it will return Unix seconds. After this, we have to write $selector.getJSON function. And under this function, we have to write data.json file with question mark with dynamic value of seconds variable. So on very request, it will make unique URL for fetch data from JSON file. After this, we have to write callback function with data argument. So this function will return JSON file data, and now we want to sort this data with value of it key value, and now for sort data, here we have to write data.sort function, and under this function, we have to write callback function with 2 parameter, now under this function. We have to write return statement with b.it key minus a.it key. So this code will sort JSON file data with it key value. Now we have to create one data array variable, and under this variable, we will store data variable data. Now for fetch data from data variable, here we have to write for loop. And under condition, we have to write count variable value is equal to 0. Count variable value is less than the value of data.length. And count variable value is increment by 1. Under this loop, we have to create one more subarray variable. And under this variable, in first key, we have to write first name. And in value, we have to write data with count index.firstName key name. In second key, we have to write last name, and in value, we have to write data with count index dot last name. In third key, we have to write gender, and in value, we have to write data with count index dot gender. In fourth key, we have to write age, and in value, we have to write data with count index dot age. And in last key, we have to write action, and under value, we will create edit and delete button, but now we will not create edit or delete button. But we will create edit or delete button when we have discuss edit or delete operation. So here, we have to store data under this subarray variable. Now we want to store data under this data array variable, so for this, here we have to write data array dot push function, and under this, we have to write subarray variable, so on every loop, it will store data under this data array variable. Now we want to initialize jQuery DataTable plugin, so for this, here we have to write $selector with table its sample data with DataTable method. So this method will initialize jQuery DataTable library. Now under this method, we have to define option. So in first option, we have to write data, and in value, we have to write data array. So here, we have to define JavaScript source data, which will be displayed in jQuery DataTable. In second option, we have to write order, and in value, we have to write blank array. So this option will remove default ordering feature, and in third option, we have to write columns option, and here we have to define table column data. So for display first name data, in first table column, here, we have to write data option, and in value, we have to write first name key. In second column, we want to display last name key data, so here we have to write data option, and in value, we have to write last name key. In third column, we want to display gender key data, so for this, here we have to write data option, and in value, we have to write gender key. In fourth column, we want to display age key data, so for this, here we have to write data option, and in value, we have to write age key. And in last table column, we want to display action key data, so for this, we have to write data option, and in value, we have to write action key, so here we have to define table column data. So here function is ready for load JSON file data in jQuery DataTable. Now we want to call this function when page has been loaded in the browser. So here we have called this load data function, so this function will be called on page load. Now we have saved this code and check output in the browser. Friends, here on the web page, we can see that when page has been loaded in the browser. So here we can see that JSON file data has been loaded under jQuery DataTable plugin. Here we have used JavaScript data source option for load display JSON file data in jQuery DataTable. And by using jQuery DataTable plugin, here we can see that live search data feature, table column sorting feature, and pagination link has been created without writing any line of code, and by using jQuery DataTable, we can see in JSON file data in tabular format on the web page. So we can easily manage JSON file data. So in this part, we have learned how to read data from JSON file and display in jQuery DataTable plugin. In next part, we will learn how to store or insert or add data in JSON file by using PHP script and Bootstrap 5 modal. So we will be meet in next part.